Okay, so one small update in regards to the matter. Heidi has actually released some transcripts between her and Holly, so I'll be linking that in the description below. Please check it out and come to your own conclusions on that matter. Oh man, things have really taken quite a turn, haven't they? So, yeah, Jared's finally come forward with his side of the story regarding the allegations of the underage fans. And it looks like I may owe him an apology. I initially tried to be careful with my words, using terms like alleged, but I also made it pretty evident where I stood on the overall issue. I can't remember exactly how my thought process was at the time, but I do remember one line of rationale towards my stance was that the people accusing him didn't seem to have any reason to lie. The only reason I could conceive for why they would want to lie would be for attention and fame, but for whatever reason I was under the impression that they weren't getting huge from accusing Jared, and I could have sworn that they were anonymous at first. But as Jared proved in his latest video, they were utilizing the accusations to boost a not safe for work blog. I'll be sure to link the video in the description below, but I'll try to give a summary of the overall video here. Jared denies the allegations levied against him. He claims that the people who accused him either lied or were mistaken. In the case of Chai, he shows a blog post he made stating that he suffered from psychosis, and as such could very well legitimately believe that his accusations against Jared are true even if they aren't. Jared argues that Chai doesn't have any actual evidence of them having conversed with one another, so it's their word against his, and he's absolutely right on that. In the absence of evidence in either direction, the only position we can take is that of neutrality, and innocent until proven guilty. Granted, he technically didn't actually put his word out at the time, but regardless, we, and by extension I, shouldn't have rushed to conclusions. And in the case of Charlie, he actually did provide evidence that he and Jared interacted. However, Jared has provided more context to their interactions that showed that he lied about his age. Now, I'm generally of the persuasion that you shouldn't be sending nudes to people, especially strangers over the internet, and this is one of the reasons why, but there's a world of difference between someone exchanging nudes with someone knowing that they're underage and exchanging nudes with someone who lied about their age. From what I understand though, in regards to the law, you can still be charged even if you had no way of knowing what their age was. And it is admittedly a very murky issue. When you're dealing with an actual real-life encounter, there really is no excuse in the case of statutory rape, given that even if you didn't know their age, you could have asked to see some kind of identification or the like. But when we're talking about exchanging lewd images, it's more complicated, as Jared brings up in his video. That would require the individual to dox themselves, and they could simply Photoshop an ID anyway, rendering it meaningless. So this puts us in a difficult situation, since exchanging explicit images between consenting adults is something that our society at large believes should only be the business of the parties involved, but it also puts one at the risk of being deceived by someone underage. So we acknowledge that one should, in the very least, have the right to exchange explicit images with other consenting adults, but to do such a thing necessitates putting oneself at the risk of unintentionally receiving such an image from someone who lied about their age. At the same time, you could also argue that part of the reason for the law is to protect children, and part of that is protecting them from their own bad judgment calls, so I can't exactly say that the law should be changed. But this still leaves us with this overarching dilemma. I don't really have an answer to this issue, but in the very least I think we can agree that on an ethical basis, being deceived on someone's age is vastly different than actively preying on someone underage. After this, he brings up a situation where someone accused him of showing naked pictures of her to some other guys, to which he denies the allegations. Jared states that Pamela got this information from a third party, and that it may have actually happened, but the witness may have mistaken him as the perpetrator, at least if I'm understanding correctly. He argues that he couldn't have done it because he never hosted any panel at the con she mentions. He also says that 3 of the 4 gentlemen involved in this situation say he didn't do it, and Pamela herself has even come clean on Twitter and admitted that he was right. And lastly is the cheating scandal. He states that he wanted to separate from Heidi long ago and that she wouldn't allow him to. Honestly, I'm not terribly invested in that particular story. Even if we assume the absolute worst about Jared in that particular situation, it ultimately isn't something that couldn't be forgiven with time, and it's more of a personal matter between them regardless. After watching this video, I decided to take a look at the Twitter mob to see if anyone could provide a solid argument for why Jared's response should be dismissed. I always like to hear multiple potential arguments before making a statement, so I can be sure to address any potential counterpoints. But so far I honestly haven't seen anything convincing. Some claim that he monetized the video, which I haven't seen any ads on it, and even if he did, it ultimately does nothing to disprove any of his arguments. At most, it makes him look kind of shady. And same goes for the description of his video plugging some of his other stuff. Maybe not the most appropriate time, but ultimately means nothing in regards to the actual arguments being presented. Then we have this tweet where someone attacks Jared by claiming he's being manipulative by looking sad and unshaven. So essentially, because Jared looks the way you'd expect a man to look after his career was potentially ruined by a false accusation, he simply must be faking it. Now, is it possible that Jared's playing things up for the camera? I suppose, but that's pure speculation. Especially since he really doesn't give any impression of doing such a thing. In the video he sounds broken up, but he's not quivering or doing anything that someone might try to do if they wanted to play up how something's impacted them. Furthermore, let's imagine for a moment that he showed no signs of having been drastically affected by this whole situation. The argument in that circumstance would likely be that he's some kind of psychopath. While I won't deny that a person's body language can give some indicators of whether or not they're being honest, the argument here is that if you act in a manner that you would likely act if you were innocent, you must be faking it. Let's assume for just a moment that Jared is telling the truth 100%. How would you expect him to act? They also claim that he did the deep sigh thing, which I watched the video and I don't recall him doing that. Maybe I just didn't notice it, but it sounds like they're playing up how fake they think it is. Regardless though, none of this does anything to prove his argument's wrong. The closest thing to that are the claims that he's deflecting, which I frankly don't see how he's doing that in his video. Next we have this person claiming that Jared literally claimed a victim hallucinated it all, failed to understand how sex abuse victims have to pretend to be okay and cannot trust authorities, which has been the case every time, and said the victims wanted money and attention for saying they were abused. I want to draw attention to their usage of the term victim. This is a common tactic among people who wish to circumvent the concept of due process and the burden of proof. They present their arguments on the platter of them being just so demonstrably true. And this tactic is especially effective when dealing with serious accusations like these because it allows them to shame anyone who presents any information contrary to the narrative as attempting to gaslight the accuser. But when your argument is built on the foundation that you simply must be right because how dare you question otherwise, it fundamentally falls apart for anyone who understands the concept of innocent until proven guilty. Now to be fair, it is true that Jared hasn't proven his side of the story to be irrefutably true. It is, in the very least, conceivable that he might have lied about not having interacted with Chai, but he has provided a reasonable doubt to the story that he knowingly and willingly manipulated underage fans. The fact is, Chai did state that he had psychosis, in which case it's totally plausible that he never actually interacted with Jared. And he did demonstrate that Charlie, in the very least, was using the situation for fame and money. In fact, Charlie might have manipulated Chai to think that he was genuinely abused so he'd have someone else to back up his claims. We simply can't claim to know without evidence. Something else that I should point out, people have been accusing ProJared of monetizing the situation for plugging some of his things in the description and for, supposedly, monetizing his video. Which again, I haven't seen any ads on no matter how many times I've watched it, but I digress. So if Jared's side of the story must be wrong on the basis that he plugged parts of his brand in the description, then Charlie would also have to be wrong for using the attention and trying to get Chai to use the attention to make money. Now, the closest thing to a valid point in this tweet would probably be what he said about how sex abuse victims don't always trust authorities. There certainly are instances of victims not trusting authorities, whether they have legitimate reason to or not, and it doesn't prove that they weren't abused. So Jared's argument that they went to the Game Grumps instead of the authorities was one of his weaker arguments. But with that being said, it doesn't invalidate anything else Jared argued in his video. Especially since he provided proof that Charlie did in fact lie about his age, so unless some evidence comes to light that this was not the case, his story does sound pretty reasonable. So now I'd like to answer the question some of you may be having, which is, do I regret my initial video on the ProJared situation? To my credit, I did say that the accusations were alleged, but I did so in a way that was unlikely to actually convince anyone to stay neutral, and especially in this particular line. But one of the screenshotted conversations did give a pretty good indication of where one of these girls were mentally at the time. Yeah, even at the time there was a part of me that was questioning how valid this argument was. The fact that they use the term baby doesn't really offer that much insight into what their age or mindset really is. But that was more or less the argument the accuser was using, and I guess I just assumed the people taking their side on the matter likely knew better than I did. I also think the fact that Jared was remaining silent on the matter, save a single Twitter post addressing the cheating scandal and not the nude scandal, felt like an indicator to me that he had no actual defense in regards to the matter. When in reality he was simply gathering the needed evidence and waiting for all the hype surrounding the situation to die down. Even though there are people who clearly don't want to give Jared's side of the event a fair hearing and simply wish to continue condemning him. Another thing Jared said in his video was that none of the drama channels that were talking about the situation reached out to interview him and get his side of the story, and that they just wanted clicks. I think there's a bit more nuance to it than that. While that might have been the case for some of them, others might have genuinely believed he wouldn't be speaking on the matter. Especially since he had remained silent on pretty much all of his public platforms. And in my case, I sincerely doubt he ever would have given me an interview, but I can understand why he would be distraught at the fact that no one tried to get his side of the story. For what it's worth though, I do apologize for having jumped on the bandwagon. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.